It's 4:30 in the morning, and we're being picked up from the hotel in the dark, driving out of the city towards Teotihuacan, which off in the distance along this drive, you can occasionally see what looks like Christmas lights off in the distance of the towns that we would drive through. And come to find out that these were small altars to the Virgin Mary, lit before dawn, which offers a sort of comfort but a reminder of the deep tradition and history found in Mexico. Then all of a sudden, we're in a hot air balloon and the sun starts to come up, and the pyramid of sun comes into view. 7,300 feet above sea level in a metropolitan area of 23 million people in a country that is right now the single largest source of imports into the United States. And somewhere below me, supply chains are moving. That's the vantage point for this conversation. Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Milligan, and we are proudly presented by SPI Logistics. And for this episode, most U.S. logistics professionals talk about Mexico constantly. There's nearshoring, there's cross-border corridors, there's the USMCA, there's driver capacity. It's in every forecast, conference panel, and freight brokerage pitch deck right now. Most of them have never been to Mexico. But I just got back from 8 days in Mexico City, to be exact. 4 of those days were spent at the Logistics World Summit and Expo, where I hosted the main stage in a podcast style format and recorded interviews with some of the sharpest minds in all of supply chain and logistics. Those conversations coming soon. But the other 4 days were personal extension with my husband, Badr, wandering around Mexico neighborhoods and eating tacos at every opportunity, and even catching a Lucha Libre wrestling event on one of our nights. But what I saw on the conference floor and in the streets, it gave me a different read on the industry's relationship with Mexico than any analyst report has. This episode is that read. Now, for the sake of this episode, I want to give sort of a high level, macro view. I sort of talked about the high level trip view, but for the high level conference view, and especially for myself, a lot of the US based audience that I have, which I think over 60% of our audience is US based, you've likely never heard of the Logistics World Expo and Summit. And unless you're working in cross-border trade or, somehow close or located, close to the Mexico US border, this was a conference that I had never heard of, but shout out to Pablo Silva, who approached me after a Manifest conference a couple of years ago. I just got done hosting a panel, and he dropped a business card with me and said, I would love for you to come down and see what we're building and see what we have been building for a long time. And this event, just the more that I was in the country, the more that I surrounded myself and started learning more about this event. This event is family run. It has been in the family for more than 20 years. When it first got started, this Logistics World, Expo and Summit, or Summit and Expo, when it first got started, it was a handful of booths and like 14 people that showed up to their first event 20 years ago. And now this year, and I'm going to glance at my notes. Anytime you see me looking, across the screen for the video audience, I am looking at my notes because I took so many notes on this trip. But it is over 26,000, actually 26,583 attendees, and mostly from the C-suite of in and around the Central America logistics ecosystem. It's the second largest logistics conference in the Americas. And so just thinking about it from that lens, if you've ever been to, I personally have never been to MODEX, but MODEX takes place, and I believe in Atlanta each year in the States. And they follow kind of a similar model where in the expo floor, it's free to attend. And then you pay an upgrade for what's called a gold pass at the Logistics Summit and Expo, where you get access to, more of the, you get access to food and water, snacks, things like that. So extra perks, little waiting areas that are scattered around the expo floor, kind of private meeting areas that you can take advantage of. But the majority of the expo floor itself, which I believe had more than 650 vendors in that space. So think of it as 650 vendors, 26,000 people. I mean, it's a kind of a good, good little symbolism there for the year of 2026. There's free sessions, but then there's also paid upgrades. That's what a very similar model that Modex offers, which is the same for Logistics World, where they have, paid VIP kind of upgrades. They call it their gold pass. But the majority of the expo floor is free. And so if you've ever been to like a quote unquote normal conference where you probably are paying over $1,000 to go, and everybody is paying at least that amount to go there. When you wander around the expo floor, it's sort of a booth situation where you're waiting at the people at the booth are waiting for people to walk up to them and come and start a conversation with them. Where in the reverse at Logistics World, it's very, very much like they have a big group of people who are standing on the outside of the booth trying to get you to come and talk to them, handing out flyers, business cards, promo items, things like that. And the one thing that stuck out the most to me, and I was shocked to see it, was that not the overwhelming majority, but more than 50% of the audience that was wandering the expo floor and working the booths were women. More than 50%. And I'd never seen anything like it. The closest thing that I've seen is a conference like Manifest or even TMSA to an extent, but I think TMSA, Transportation Marketing and Sales Association, it focuses on more the marketing side. And demographically, women tend to be more in marketing when it comes to the logistics, breakup of demographic. More men tend to be brokers, more women tend to work in the marketing departments. Obviously, that's not the case for every single logistics company. So don't come for me. But it was noticeably different at Logistics World. It looked like decision makers, media. I couldn't tell you how much media I saw there of I thought Manifest, had and it does have a really good representation of podcasting creators and YouTubers there. I'd never seen anything like it at Logistics World. Whereas media, every chance you turn around, there's a photographer, there's a nice camera system, there's creators making content, very similar to some of the bigger conferences in the States, is that you'll have a kind of a media area, media setup. Logistics World had that plus that. And so you saw a bunch of women everywhere. You saw a fantastic podcast studio set up where they're recording interviews live on site. And that was my role. That was the reason I was invited to Logistics World, was not only to co-host one of the keynote sessions with Bart, who you probably know him on any of these, Bart de Munich. I think that's how you say his last name. Apologies, Bart, if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but he is a legend over it. He's a first name kind of logistics pro. Gartner experience. Now, he's doing consulting. He's doing, a really cool show like Whining About Supply Chain, which, him and his guests will sip on wine while they talk about different supply chain topics, which I think is a really cool concept. But he was one of the opening keynote. I think he was the opening keynote speaker for the international stage. And so that's where Logistics World is making, a further expansion where they are starting to invite international speakers to come to their event. And so it was myself, it was Bart, it was Sherry Heinisch, aka Supply Chain Queen, who I have adored and thought of as an industry role model for years. She is one of the first creators that I followed back when I was working as an executive assistant at an asset-based 3PL. And so I've been following her work for a long time. I even built, one of her first websites. So I have known of her for a very long time. And so it was an honor to be able to meet some of these people that you've been following for a long time, see them in person, have these long form conversations. So I recorded a couple of those conversations with Kate Vidicek. She is a supply chain professor at the University of Tennessee. And I also recorded with Sherry Heinisch, Supply Chain Queen. Those are the official podcasts for Logistics World. So those conversations should be debuting on the Logistics World channel. But as soon as they drop, I'll be sure to, make sure that you guys can hear, those conversations as well, because I loved having them. So I obviously I want to share them. Then there was another conversation I had with Kareem Krufri. God, I'm sorry, Krufi, I think is his last name. And yes, I think I said it correctly, but he's also a supply chain genius who I recorded independently with him. So we will have that conversation coming soon. I believe in the same week that this episode is dropping. So if you want to hear more about these kinds of conversations, especially from a global supply chain perspective, highly encourage you to go listen to those chats. But it was unbelievable to see how many women and how much media was at this event, to the point where, especially from a female perspective, I was like, why are there so many women here? I've never seen anything like it. Like, what lessons can we take back to the States with getting more women involved in the logistics industry? And and this is obviously anecdotal, but I had asked a couple women there that were, helping with the event, organizing the event, and they had never really thought about it from that lens, which I think is fantastic as well. It's just a normal thing for women to be this heavily involved in logistics. And so when I asked them, I was like, well, why do you think that is, that there's so many women here at this event and helping out with the event? I mean, even the event organizer team, all women. The people that were helping us from a day-to-day basis get from point A, get from the hotel over to the actual event center, because the event center is their conference center is so big. I think it's called the Centro Banamex. And I'm working on my Spanish. Obviously, that was brutal, but I'm working on my Spanish. It's clear after this trip I need to do so. But speaking with that team, that all female team, I asked them, and they said that they believe that women are much more involved in logistics is because they are more empathetic. They seem to care more. And when you think about it from the lens of logistics is really just problem solving and putting out fires each day, when you have someone that is more empathetic and more willing to problem solve, then it makes the case that a lot more women would become natural fits for this industry, and that more men to an extent would want to talk to women, because they can't really complain about some of these things to their fellow men, because they're going to be seen as kind of perception wise weaker, that they can't figure things out, or maybe they're afraid to, not afraid, but maybe they're a little hesitant to ask for help. Whereas if they're talking to a woman, then they kind of can let their guard down a little bit. And I'm paraphrasing what she was telling me, but it made a lot of sense. And talking to another woman in the industry, she is US based, actually my cousin, who was responsible for getting me into logistics in the first place, who made me move away from waiting tables and to come take this executive assistant job at a 3PL. She has worked in trucking and knows more about trucking than any person that I've ever met. Shout out to my cousin Becky Brown. And she has worked at various different trucking companies. She now works for the Department of Defense, and so she's gotten out of working for trucking companies. She just got worn down from it. But she still has, to this day, she's been out of trucking for more than 5 years, but she still has truck drivers calling her at least once a week in order for her to help them get through some kind of paperwork nonsense or some kind of claims process, accounting procedures, things like that. And I was telling her about this experience and why there were so many women, and she co-signed it. And she said that there are numerous male drivers who will call her because they don't know who else to talk to, and they don't know who else is actually going to care to help them solve these problems. And so I think that there is something to be said about that mindset of a woman working in logistics. And maybe that's why we see so many more women working in this field in the country of Mexico, whereas in the United States, I don't know what the hell we're doing, but that's maybe a concept that you want to keep in mind if you're in charge of hiring or if you're in charge of recruiting for your company. Customer service and empathy is only going to matter more in the age of technology and streamlining and automation and efficiency. You still want somebody to care. And maybe that is the future role that women can really shine in this industry. Not to say that they're not shining in certain positions, caveat, caveat, yada, yada. But I just wanted to put that out there, that I thought that that was incredibly fascinating, of why so many more women are working in logistics in the country of Mexico versus any other conference that I have seen, any other event or company that I have seen in the United States. And so maybe, not maybe, but those are some lessons that we can take from our cross-border neighbors. And so With all of that said, just giving a high level view of the event itself, and then just seeing what kind of companies are there and what kind of companies are promoting their services. One of the more fascinating things that I saw was cargo security. Obviously, cargo crime, freight fraud, those things are top of mind for an overwhelming majority of companies in the States. Well, it's also top of mind for an overwhelming majority of companies in Mexico. And the way that they displayed their escorts, their police presence to protect cargo, I thought it was fascinating. You could walk around the expo floor and bump into different security companies that have their own fleet of trucks to protect different semi truck operations, to protect different load shipments. We're talking heavy artillery, heavy guns, big, strong guys, but then also a lot of women as well, and just deep security knowledge, or the promotion of that knowledge to the wider audience on the expo floor. I thought that was really cool as well. Then there was a couple just like cultural things, not cultural things, but just cultural differences that I thought were really interesting. A lot of booths that were giving out promo items. They gave out antacids. And so when you think about, especially as an American going down to some of these shows, your diet is off. Not just an American going to Mexico, but as an American going to a conference in general, your diet's off, your schedule's off. You're eating foods that you're probably not, normally going to be doing. Same thing is happening in Mexico, except for the booths and at Logistics World, we're giving out antacids in order to help you with that problem. Which I thought was really funny. And then another funny thing that I thought was I loved, maybe some other people don't, but there were so many booths with an open liquor bar, several bottles of liquor that you could go up and walk up and have them make you a drink. And it was fascinating to see. I mean, obviously you have robotics that are on display, and we'll add in post-production. So if you're listening to the audio version of this, I would encourage you to go watch the video version, because in post-production, after I'm done recording this, I'm going to go through and make some notes about where, Josh, our podcast editor, will go in and add different B-roll of just the photos and things, videos that I took while on the trip. But I guess as a cosign, and I kind of hinted at this earlier, that if you see me in video format, kind of looking off to the side, I'm reading my notes, because on trips like this, I have an Apple Notes up constantly. Every day of a trip like this, I'm taking notes, I'm writing things down, cool things that I saw, interesting things that I saw, questions I want to get answered, companies I want to connect with later on when I'm back. And so when you see me kind of looking off to the side, I'm looking at these notes of like day by day and breaking them down into different themes of what I saw. So that's sort of the high level view of this event and of this conference. And I was thoroughly impressed. I would say, because I have a US based audience, and because I've been to Manifest so many times, when I'm at Manifest, sometimes it is people exhausting. I have to go into the bathroom to hide because I just need 10 minutes of silence just to sort of gather my thoughts and get my head straight, versus this conference where there was a language barrier for me. I'm very, very blessed that and thankful for the people who took the time throughout their lives to learn English as a secondary language and to be able to have a conversation with me. Growing up in Florida, you kind of just learn and I say the very basics. I mean, you can count to 5, you can say gracias, you can say hola, like very basic Spanish. But during that trip, I was very mad at myself that I had not taken the time in my 40 years on this earth to learn the Spanish language. And so this is going to be an event for me, for my husband, that we will personally come back to time and time again. And so because of that, we have now taken on a personal mission to learn more Spanish, so we can not just, be able to have very short conversation. I use the word conversations here lightly, in Mexico, but I want to say I want to become fluent, but I know how challenging it is to learn a language in your older age and become fluent in it. So I know this is probably something that's going to take a lot longer than just a year, but my goal for next year's event is just to be able to have a regular, maybe a short and condensed high level conversation at some of the booths that I was really interested in talking to. But because there was a language barrier that existed, I wasn't able to talk to as many people as I thought I would be able to. So, with all that said, it was a conference that I could actually walk through and enjoy, and not with the pressure of being stopped every, kind of 5 minutes to catch up with somebody. And I don't want to say that's pressure because I love talking to people in person. It just, I'm one of those people that's like a social battery where I go into an event like TMSA or Freight Waves or Manifest, and my social battery, I am preparing for it to be consumed on a daily basis. And then when I come back from that event, then I need to have like 2 weeks where I don't talk to anybody. And that's how I recharge. But at this event, I didn't need that because I wasn't talking to that many people. I was trying to make do with different conversations. I was trying to use Google Translate and all of these different apps to try to make the conversation barrier a little less intensive for me. And then also the people that you're visiting and the country that you're visiting, being able to show a little bit of respect of learning their language too and learning their culture and traditions. I feel that that's a deep responsibility that any one of us going to a different country should take the time to learn. But with that said, you really learn best when you're engulfed and you're entrenched in the country itself. And so you're forced to only use that method of communication. And so you do become better faster. But outside of the bubble, what I've been doing is downloading, Spotify books and ebooks and listening to them and trying to get a little bit better at my Spanish. So hopefully it will be better for next year. So that's kind of like my general read on the overall event itself. And now I want to get into a little bit more of the overall Mexico supply chain, which I thought was incredibly fascinating. And I'm still like deep diving into the different nuances of the Mexico supply chain. And so a couple of the notes that I want to read off here, because I think it's important to set this perspective that a lot of US freight people are still treating Mexico as a trend rather than a fact. In 2024, Mexico became the number one source of US imports at $466.6 billion, where 15.6% of all US imports are coming from Mexico. And that is a large number. Foreign direct investment jumped more than 10% year over year to 34.3 billion in 2020, in the first half of 2025 alone. 36% of that number flowing into manufacturing. Only 20% of companies evaluating supply chain footprint fully plan to reshore to the US. And so that other 80% are landing somewhere. And a lot of them are landing in Mexico. So this is not a trend. This is an infrastructure level shift of global trade, where our primary partner used to be China. And you could make an argument that a lot of those Chinese companies are setting up manufacturing facilities and shipping their products to Mexico. And yes, that has happened. But, as of the tariff war and as global trade is being restructured under this presidency, what we are seeing is a massive shift in manufacturing across the globe, where you have, yes, Chinese companies that are creating Chinese owned manufacturing companies in Vietnam and in Mexico. But you also have a lot of Mexico manufacturing, that first party sourcing, and a lot of US companies setting up manufacturing facilities in the US. And so that makes those numbers a lot more understandable of it's just a natural fit of where the supply chain is evolving and where it's going to, rather than where it's been in the past. And so I think that's an important note, that for a lot of us, if you didn't know about this conference and if you didn't know about a lot of these trends, hopefully you know now of the importance of this relationship with Mexico and how we need to solidify a lot of these business relationships. Logistics is all about relationships, and it doesn't matter if it's a US based company or a Latin American based company. Relationships matter when it comes to setting up the future of where the supply chain is moving to. So those were some couple notes that I wanted to point out. Another, just sort of things that I wanted to point out too, just culturally observing, especially from a traffic perspective, because when you're thinking about a city that has an estimate of, 23 to 25 million, that's what Mexico City has. That's where the conference was, if I didn't already state that. But 25 million people, the traffic was unlike anything I've ever seen, just organized chaos. A lot of the roads, there's no lane markers on the roads themselves, kind of pulling in and pulling out, all the traffic patterns. You just kind of have to, I got the feeling, because we took Ubers everywhere, but I got the feeling from watching this that you really have to train as a driver for the majority of your life to learn, I guess, the nuances of like how to merge in traffic, how to get out of traffic, how to make a U-turn, how to, because there were some tight spots and I didn't think that cars were going to fit, but they fit. And I did not see one single wreck. I didn't see one car kind of pulled over. They could have been pulled over. Maybe I just didn't notice. But I didn't see any of that. It was just, it looked like chaos, but it was very well organized and everybody kind of seemed to know what to do and how to do it. And nobody was really angry at each other either. Like, in the New York, for example, you can't go probably 30 minutes without hearing a horn beep. And yes, you're going to hear horns in Mexico City as well, but it was more of like a heads up. Like if you're driving through a four-way intersection, people are beeping their horns just to kind of give a signal to maybe the ongoing or the coming traffic that, hey, we're coming through. And so there's all these different sort of cultural nuances that it looked chaotic from an outsider point of view, but from nope, none of our drivers looked stressed. Didn't see any angry honking or anything like that. It was just kind of a honking to kind of say heads up instead of a honking or like a FU honk. There's a big difference between the two. So that was one thing that I noticed. Also, I loved the secondary economy of street vendors, that in the traffic itself, you would see somebody walking through the cars or walking by cars selling stuffed animals, selling cell phone holders, offering to wash your windshield, selling drinks or slushies or food. Just that kind of secondary economy for the people who are stuck in traffic for forever, because that's one thing that they don't tell you about visiting Mexico City, is that it's going to take a lot longer to get wherever you want to go depending on traffic. Mexico City is a large city, and from what I understand, they back in the early 80s, I believe in 85, the city had a massive earthquake where a lot of buildings structurally didn't survive. And so since then, they've made a lot of improvements in the building code, the building structures, and learned a lot. I mean, same thing in the US of what we've learned from a construction standpoint of how to build better whenever these massive catastrophes happen. And so apparently this happened in 1985, I believe, in Mexico City, where for a while before they upgraded the building construction methodology, they just built out. And so the city is super spread out, which is why it takes so long to get maybe from one side of town to the other. And now, from the lens of like a safety aspect, which yes, you have to think about, Mexico from a safety aspect. My family, my husband's family, friends, they were very worried, frankly, about us going to Mexico. And I think that's because you just grow up hearing some horror stories, but those are isolated events, and not isolated is obviously the cartel exists. There's different regions of the country that are controlled by the cartel. Mexico City, from my understanding, is a little bit of a safe haven from that because it is the capital city. And so you have neighborhoods where I had locals telling us, walk this way, don't walk this way. Other locals telling us, do not go to this side of town. In the hotel where we stayed at for the event, they had like a 5-story mall that the hotel was built onto. And they said, stay in the mall, don't go outside the mall. And so that's where a little bit of the, and my husband did, he takes a look outside and he doesn't see any problems. He wants to go and explore those areas, but it took locals telling us, no, that's not a good idea. And I quote, this is still Mexico, was said by multiple locals, trying to educate us on, just don't wear a lot of flashy jewelry, be careful. Don't, go out after, 8 p.m. Even a lot of the nicer areas that are walkable, which is the second part of our trip, which is where, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but the second part of our trip, we stayed in an area called Roma Norte, and that area is very much walkable, but still at night, most of that area of town shuts down. It's usually around 8 p.m. that a lot of places will shut down and they won't stay open. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but probably put, a couple things together that people would just rather be safe than sorry. And they don't want to put themselves in a situation where you're, I don't want to say asking for trouble, but yeah, you get it. And so just having, I think, that reassurance of the locals telling us where to go, where not to go, kind of confirmed our already travel plans for the second part of our trip, and honestly made things a lot easier to navigate, where we're not playing a guessing game or kind of looking outside and saying, that doesn't look too bad. We can take a stroll through that neighborhood. But for locals to tell us, no, yeah, your assumptions are wrong. They're incorrect. You want to walk in these areas of town, do not walk over here. And that was verbatim told to us. So that was just a couple things to keep in mind as well. But the overall city is so beautiful. You cannot take a step outside without smelling some kind of food. It is known, Mexico City is known as one of the top food cities in the world. And so being able to kind of go through that, or experience that cultural aspect in different areas of the walkable parts of the city were unmatched. And then you have the other parts of the city that is just so much greenery, and it feels kind of like an oxymoron to say that there's so much greenery in an urban landscape, but that is the best way to describe Mexico City, is that it's so lush with planned parks and just flowers everywhere and greenery, tropical plants, and just incredible to walk around in a city and be surrounded at some points with just nature all around you. And it was really, really cool to experience that. And so just be able to, explore the different areas. I think Condesa and Roma and Polanco, these different areas that are kind of known in Mexico City as more affluent. And so having the walkability and the true, like, you're kind of feel like you're, part of the city almost. That was really eye-opening versus the first part of our trip. We were in a mall, and the mall was also an incredible experience because it was like the malls from, and if you're a millennial and you're listening to this, or even, a Gen Xer, you know what I'm talking about, in the mall with I guess the heyday of a mall, and going to a mall and seeing all of your favorite stores, Tommy Hilfiger, Forever 21, even, like a GNC, all of those mall type stores, Sears, JC Penney's, those types of stores all existed within this mall. And it was fantastic to see that, sort of third place that people used to, in the States, used to go and hang out, especially on the weekends, especially if you were a teenager. What were you doing this weekend? Oh, we're going to go to the mall. Your parents would drop you off and you would spend all day at the mall getting snacks and maybe going to the movies or visiting all of your favorite shops. That still existed in Mexico City. And for the first few days of the conference, that was one of my, I guess, unsuspecting favorite parts of the trip, is just being able to walk around and take a picture of a Forever 21 sign, a store that I used to frequent all of the time as a younger millennial, or in the, I guess, back in my heyday of going to the mall, and you would be able to go to all of these different stores. There was a Woolworths, not in the mall, but in Mexico City. And so just yeah, it was almost like a flashback of, my teenage years and early adult years where this was just part of our culture. And if you are missing that part of your culture, it very much still exists in Mexico City. So that was amazing to see, especially on the first part of our trip. And so getting into some of the other different aspects of this trip, I wanted to bring up some different stats, especially when it comes to some of the trade relations with Mexico and how that's evolving. There are definitely some similarities when it comes to Mexico and US trade. One of those things is definitely about the quote unquote driver shortage, which there are some media companies in Mexico that are perpetuating that myth as well. And very similar to the United States, where there's the famous driver shortage myth, where it's more of a retention issue, not a recruitment or a shortage issue. And so what you have is, companies that are offering these very high pay bonuses, and there's really no stipulation around accepting that bonus. And so you have drivers that are willing to go to a company, collect the bonus, and stay there for a period of 4 to 6 months, and then they'll go to another company and do the same. That's perfectly well within their right. But because of the way those numbers are recorded, it's recorded as a driver shortage issue instead of a driver retention issue. And so I thought that was interesting that, some of those myths that exist in the United States when it comes to recruiting truck drivers also exist in Mexico. But the big key difference that I should point out is that a Mexico truck driver is dealing with a vastly different set of circumstances versus a US based truck driver, where yes, your life, it can sometimes be in danger as a US based truck driver, but for Mexico, it is an everyday reality. When you have a position that doesn't pay as well, but the security demands and the life threatening demands are much higher, then obviously you are going to have a situation where recruitment is going to be lower. And so that's a very much a reality in Mexico as well. Pre-pandemic, top Mexican driver pay was around $2,300 a month. Now in the US private fleet drivers can now earn around $100,000 a year, including bonuses. Now that's obviously that those are averages. I think Walmart is really the only company that can pay drivers up to that amount. You have to work in the industry for a long time to get that kind of a rate. But still, that's even if it was half of that for a US based driver, you're still earning significantly more than a Mexican based driver per month. So it's really it's an arbitrage problem, and it's something that you just got to be cautious of, or you got to know that going in for these different industries and relative to your specific country's recruiting process. That some of these issues are the same, but also like most jobs, it comes down to pay. Are you willing to pay a premium for top level talent? And then are you willing to train that talent, that newcomer talent, to become top level? And how much are you willing to pay that new driver relative to the lifestyle that they're likely going to have to lead? In the US, you're away from your families, you have a shit diet, you don't get to sleep in your own bed every night. A lot of those same things exist in Mexico, but you also add on the additional. I don't want to say not a benefit, obviously, but the consequence or the threat of security playing a very large role. Maybe the lack of security playing a very large role on if young men or women are going to enter in the truck driving profession. So that I think that there's some unique circumstances that exist in Mexico, but also very similar that those circumstances exist for the US based driver as well. It's just the US based driver is getting paid a lot more to do the same job with a lot less security threats relative to the country of Mexico and what their drivers experience, especially from a recruitment standpoint and the challenges that exist there. From a cargo crime perspective, which everybody is talking about cargo crime. So, we have to, it was I don't want to say a major focus of the expo floor, but there were definitely several security companies that were on the expo floor. And so with that said, a transport vehicle is stolen every 38 minutes in Mexico. 86% of those incidents involve violence. In loss ratio terms, Mexico ranks worst in the world. I mean, these are just, stats that I'm pulling up from Claude, from first party sources, I might add. But I will say cargo theft fell 21%, a little over 21% in 2025 versus 2024. That's based on government data. So, if we'll see. I would like to see where the government is pulling those primary sources, because there's always ways. I knew this from my sports days. There's always a way to massage stats in to look a little bit better than maybe what they are. If a transport vehicle is stolen every 38 minutes in Mexico, and in loss ratio terms they rank worst in the world, then that is a positive sign that the cargo theft is falling from 2025 versus 2024. It's probably some work that still needs to be done, but that is a significant number for it to fall that much in just a year's time. Now, filing a formal threat report or not threat, but filing a formal theft report in Mexico costs $2,100 in fees. So you get your stuff stolen, and then you have to file the theft report and pay $2,100. That seems, that's a little, I think that's a barrier of entry to report more crime data. So I would love to know what the intricacies are in the United States on, if you wanted to file a theft report, what kind of fees does that look like? Are they going to impound your vehicle as part of the investigation? There are some real questions to kind of ask there, relative to how each country compares in that regard. Now, official numbers and private security firm numbers don't line up. This is all information coming from some of the private security firms in Mexico themselves. The most effective corridors within the state of Mexico is Puebla. I hope I pronounced that right. I probably didn't. I'm sorry. San Luis Postillo and Jalisco. Most of the stolen goods are groceries, general merchandise, empty equipment, not just high value cargo. So we see a lot of that in the United States as well, where, a lot of food shipments are targeted, because what happens to food? It's consumed. Drinks consumed. Pistachios consumed. Versus electronics, where they have a serial number attached to it. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say easier to track down, but a lot easier than, trying to track down, a load of avocados that is stolen, which is also known as green gold, in Mexico. And there's some crime activity around a lot of different, not just avocados, but even pistachios. I know in the States, energy drinks are another one that are potentially hit hard, because those are consumables. So once the product is stolen, or once the product is taken, you can consume it, and then there's no trace of evidence. Versus like a TV, where if a load of electronics is stolen in the United States, you perhaps have a chance to track that down and get that load back. Versus consumables, where that's not going to happen. There's also cargo security companies with that prominent booth space that were headlining a lot of these different capabilities of how they protect your cargo. I talked a little bit earlier about, private security and fleets that protect a truck. You're asking someone to drive a route where there's a real chance of armed theft. For really, these drivers are getting paid $14 a day. And so from that lens, these things matter, and these things are worth paying attention to. So then you get you can't be surprised when retention is a problem, when that's the kind of pay discrepancies or disparities that exist. And so for a lot of the executives in that room, they watched the US industry make this mistake for 2 decades. Now, the question remains, are a lot of these US executives, are they going to see these trends? Are they going to see these, how cargo crime is evolving? And are they going to make changes? And so obviously that it remains to be seen. We've done several episodes on the increase in monitoring solutions, vetting solutions, and we'll have a guide up on cargorex.io soon, where you can kind of get a high level view of what the sort of cargo crime, freight fraud epidemic looks like in North America. So we're going to include Canada, we're going to include the States, obviously, and then I'm also going to include Mexico after this trip, because I just think the disparity between the cargo crime in each of these nations is different, but also there's a lot of similarities there as well. And so if you're moving freight between our number one trade partner and the United States, then you probably need to know these things, especially if you're working for shippers with high value freight and they want to know that you're on top of these trends and on these issues that they're seeing, and they don't want their load stolen. So just keep all of that in mind. A lot of freight pros don't need another job. They need a better partner. That's where SBI Logistics comes in. They work with experienced freight agents who want to keep building their book without getting dragged down by all the back office chaos that comes with doing it alone. SPI helps with the support side, from finance to tech to carrier setup, so you can stay focused on customers, coverage, and growth. And based on all the agents I've talked to, that support is a big reason that they've made the move to SPI in the first place. Go to SPI3PL.com if you want to see what that looks like. All right, now getting into a couple of the other issues that are, I guess, high level issues that are facing US and Mexico trade is NAFTA. That is being renegotiated by July 1st of 2026, all three countries. So that is Canada, Mexico, and obviously the States. Yeah, I was going to say North America, but Canada's included in that context. But the US, Canada, and Mexico, by July 1st, 2026, all three of these countries must agree to extend the USMCA for 16 years, or a 10-year sunset clock starts, terminating the agreement in 2036. So formal three countries talks are expected to start in May of this year, but the review could push into 2027. Now, what's at stake when it comes to these negotiations is rules of the origin changes. Automotive, electronics, medical devices, supply chains running through Mexico, the rules of origin will change. And so what was happening is that for a lot of I guess let's use China for example. What they would do, especially from like a Chinese manufacturer standpoint, is they would build a plant in Mexico, or let's take Vietnam for example. It's a Chinese owned manufacturing plant. It's Chinese products. They're sourcing all of those items from China and from their partners or within China. They're just setting up almost like a PO box. They're setting up the facility in Vietnam. They're setting up the facility in Mexico, but it's really a Chinese run operation. And so the rules of origin, noticing this kind of loophole that exists where you could have a different trade relationship with Mexico and different tariff rates versus China. But if China just sets up the manufacturing plant and the only thing that they change is the address line, then you have a situation where it's still, with all due respect, it's still a Chinese run operation, still a Chinese company that's trying to set up shop in another country to take advantage of those trade relationships. And so that's what a lot of these negotiations, especially over tariffs within the last year, are being reworked and redefined now. And we're going to see a greater focus on that when these negotiations start at, hopefully in May of this year. The US was supposed to be having these trade talks with China, I believe, in April of 2026, but those talks, because of the Iran war, have been pushed back to May. And so that's going to be really big conversations that are happening and being negotiated in the month of May for both the Chinese perspective, the US perspective, and then the Mexico US perspective, which at the time of recording, the major conversations, especially with NAFTA being replaced, that Canada isn't really involved in these conversations yet. It's mostly Mexico and the US that are trying to solidify their trade relationship and bring it into a new era. And then, maybe we'll, I guess, to be determined of how Canada is going to be involved in those negotiations as well. So bottom line here, a couple just key notes. Because NAFTA is being replaced by the USMCA, most experts believe that the USMCA gets extended. This integration is too deep to walk away from, but the renegotiation will extract something and the freight industry will feel wherever that lands. So if you're moving goods on cross-border freight, if this isn't on your radar, it absolutely should be, because May could be just another month in the notch of the supply chain belt where we're just adding on new, I don't want to say crises, but it just feels like another day, another crisis. Ever since 2020, it's just been nonstop of these constant issues. that logistics and supply chain professionals are supposed to be sorting through, and you have to pay attention to all of it, and it all seems so overwhelming from a macro level and even from a micro level when you start to dive into some of the nuances of these things. But ultimately, relationships and supply chain is driven by relationships. And so hopefully, a lot of these things can come to a positive fruition here as the summer approaches. And, hopefully some of these other major geopolitical issues, like wars, are drawn down, are eliminated, or just done altogether. That's my hope anyways. Now, I've talked a lot about the US Mexico side of supply chain and logistics, gloating about, my experience at the logistics world. Now, on the flip side of the trip, I want to talk about two key moments because I opened this episode with talking about being in a hot air balloon and flying over the Pyramid of the Sun and look at Teotihuacan, which is one of these ancient sites. I'm obsessed, side note, with ancient human civilizations. To kind of put things in perspective, Teotihuacan is where the Aztecs reigned, but we don't know from a historical perspective of where the Aztecs came from. To put it in a kind of a lens, the Aztecs are sort of when we talk about ancient human civilizations, the Aztec are kind of the newer ones of these conversations when you talk about the Inca or the Maya or the Olmecs, even Egyptians, ancient Chinese civilizations, all of these different ancient civilizations. To put it in perspective, Oxford University in the UK, London, I believe, or in Oxford, um, that that university is older than the Aztec civilization. And so just to kind of keep things in that perspective, a lot of archaeologists believe that Teotihuacan is much older than the Aztecs, and that we're not exactly sure, and that the Aztecs may have come upon this area because it is a massive area of several pyramids. You have the main Pyramid of the Sun, which is the main draw, which is where we took the hot air balloon ride. Highly, highly recommend if you're in and around Mexico City to do this. It was one of the most spiritual things that I've ever experienced because you're doing it at sunrise. You're doing it over the Pyramid of the Sun. You're looking over a landscape that was a major metropolitan city globally during its time. Several pyramids, several land, you can see the city planning landscape from the air. And just knowing that you're witnessing the sun rising over the mountains, shining onto the Pyramid of the Sun, and you're looking at a city landscape, and you are a 1% of 1% of the human population that has ever seen this view and seen it from that vantage point. Something I will never forget. Highly, highly encourage anyone to go and take part in this because it hits you on a level that you didn't know that you needed. I'm not even a particularly religious person. I find myself as spiritual. I have a deep respect for faith and different religions and believe that they play a very important part of society and just hope in general, providing hope to human civilization. And so being able to see that from that perspective is something I will never forget. It brought tears to my eyes, very similar to when I first saw Machu Picchu in Peru. That was my first international trip, and it changed my lens of how I see my place in the world and how I choose to interact with the world. And I feel on a deep level that we are special from a human civilization perspective, but also we are such a small blip in the radar of the overall course of time. And so being able to see these things and appreciate it and put it into context of just human civilization in general and how much of we don't know what we don't know, but I want to try to learn as much as possible. And I want to try to learn, especially when it comes to cultures like this and experiences like this and being connected to, your not necessarily my direct ancestors, but just human civilization's ancestors in a different, unique way. I think is something that I hope that the overwhelming majority of people will be able to see and appreciate. I know that's not the case for a lot of people, but this is, sort of my I guess my diatribe on why I think looking at ancient sites like this, ancient forests, nature, construction, cultures, food, history, it's all so very important. Yeah, I cannot speak enough great things about that experience. And coupled along with that is the National Museum in Mexico of Anthropology, where it has a lot of Aztec and Mayan, Olmec cultures all within the museum. And I just want to put things into perspective because this is how much I admire Mexico as a country now after this trip. I admired it before, but and it's on a much deeper level. The country of Egypt has spent the last 20 years constructing their national museum, and where you can see King Tut, for the first time in history, all of King Tut's his chariot and his gold mask and all of the artifacts that were discovered, they're all in the same location within this museum. And then there's obelisks, and there's the Ramses statues, and it's all built within the viewpoint of the Giza pyramids. And so 20 years it took to build this museum. Compare that to in Mexico, it took them to build their museum of anthropology, their National Museum of Anthropology, which is another one of those experiences that just takes your breath away. 19 months it took to build this museum, where you have Olmec statues that were taken from the forests of, even Central America, Guatemala, a lot of these different areas or not different areas, but that area of the world where we really don't even know where the Olmecs came from or what happened to them. We think that or some archaeologists think that they're older than the Maya, older than the Inca, that they are one of the oldest civilizations in the world. And so being able to see these statues taken from one part of the country and put in a museum where the whole country can see and appreciate this level of history and connection was amazing. Amazing. This is over 300 square feet, 22 permanent galleries inside of this museum. And the way that the museum is laid out is that when you walk out into the courtyard, there's this beautiful fountain that is built on a sustainability. Actually, it's a fountain that collects rainwater and redistributes the water as a fountain, and it has all of these different Aztec kind of carvings on it, and it's meant to tell the story of sustainability and the sun gods and rain, and being able to recycle, and it just tells a beautiful story. But then counterclockwise is an entire set of buildings that go in order of time of prehistoric civilizations. Then it goes into the Olmecs, it goes into pre-Columbia history, it goes into the Aztec, then it goes into Spanish colonialism. It goes in order of human civilization. And to be able to walk amongst these people and amongst these artifacts, to see the original global trade systems that were established, it is incredible. Before money existed as a concept in Mexico, I'll give you one little factoid. Cacao. Obviously, cacao comes from, or is the root product for chocolate. Cacao beans were used as money in the ancient civilization days. And so being able to see these different trade routes of not just cacao, but of shells, of jade, of all of these different rare resources, silver and even gold. I would say cacao and jade were the number one and number two commodities in ancient Mexico, and so, or Mesoamerica. And so when you think of how concepts that we take for granted today were created, hundreds, sometimes thousands of years ago, using these same systems that exist. And, a lot of credit and a lot of things are given, or a lot of credit, I guess, is given to the Silk Road, rightfully so, or even, a lot of European history. A lot of emphasis is put there. But where I've always found it super fascinating is the Americas and the archaeological history that we are still discovering and uncovering in North, Central, and South America, where these ancient sites have just been taken over by the jungle, taken over by nature. And now we're able to explore these different cultural impacts that have taken that we didn't even know had that much of an impact until we go back and we peel back the layers. And that's what I love so much about this industry, and just supply chain anthropology, and how people and goods move through the world, and how it started and how it ended for some cultures, but then it spawned another culture, and they learned all of the teachings from there and they apply it here, or some of those teachings are lost forever, because people decided that they didn't like it and they wanted to burn it or they wanted to kill them. And it's human nature and the story of human civilization where I find the most fascinating. And this Museum of Anthropology, was just incredible. And then they have a restaurant on site that the menu is separated by different regions of Mexico. So you have the north and the south and the east and the west, and all of these different food meccas of Mesoamerica, and how different spices and different recipes started and existed, and now they kind of commingle together in Mexico City versus Oaxaca, which is south of Mexico City. That's also considered a food mecca of the world. And so being able to experience that in a museum experience, also in a food experience within the museum, a 10 out of 10 experience. I cannot wait to go back. If you do find yourself in Mexico City for any opportunity, go to this museum, hire a guide, because when I do go back to Mexico City, and I will be back, I will be hiring a guide, because I could have spent all day in that museum, and we spent about 5 or 6 hours in it. We didn't even have a chance to go to each and every room. There were so many more things that I wanted to learn. Being able to see the Aztec calendar, the Mayan calendars, the Olmec statues, even the outdoor exhibits where they have another Olmec statue that is in an outdoor exhibit where it looks like it's in the jungle. So it, quote unquote, looks like it's in its natural habitat of how you would have, if this was hundreds or thousands of years ago, you would have interacted with these statues. Seeing and experiencing that was just, on another level. It's something that I'll never forget, and something that I can't wait to do again. That I thought was really fascinating, that this entire museum, it's so in depth, it's so large scale, and it was built in 19 months versus Egypt that took 20 years. This one was built in Mexico in 19 months, and they hauled all of these, very expensive, very pricey pieces of artifact history. I'll give you a few stats here. Let's see. There were April 16th, 1964, 168-ton monolith that was 23 feet tall, largest known monolith in the Americas, took a 29-mile journey on a purpose-built trailer. So these things are very heavy. Obviously, 25,000 people when they were transporting this 168-ton monolith. 25,000 people waited in the streets. A massive storm hit during the dry season and didn't stop for days, but it didn't stop because, I guess you could probably make maybe a couple superstitious comments there, where a massive storm is hitting during the dry season and it didn't stop for days while this transport is being moved. Didn't stop 25,000 people waiting in the streets in order to watch it. So it was very enlightening, I'm sure, for a lot of folks there. So I thought that was incredible, that custom equipment was built for, these one moves, or a one move for 168 pounds. Stakeholder resistance that escalated to sabotage. There's a couple other notes here from the logistics of just building this Museum of Anthropology. A government concession package had to be created in order to release the freight. There was military intervention in order to enforce the move. So you can kind of read between the lines there that maybe some of the locals didn't appreciate some of these artifacts moving from their original location into a museum. Obviously, you can understand the context there. And then the weather event on delivery day that nobody planned for, And so just from that lens, I just think it's incredible to think about, all of these cultural aspects that were spread across the country, and having a central place where people can go and learn more about their culture and their history. And then for other cultures to come and learn about that same culture and history, I think is magnificent. But also there also is a level of respect that you have to give to these things and where they come from. And, having to walk that fine line of being able to both respect the origin and then also tell the story of your origin. That was just a lot of the things that I noticed throughout this trip. I've said 100 times that this was an incredible trip, and I can't wait to go back. And so we are a little bit over an hour of recording this episode. And so, just keeping I guess, all of those aspects in mind, this is an event that I would highly encourage every person in my audience to go and partake in, especially if you work in logistics or supply chain, if you work anywhere near cross-border trade, or anything around the cargo crime aspect. This is a conference that you should be going to. And then if you go to this conference, you can obviously add on the different cultural aspects that give you a deeper appreciation of Mexico as a country, history, traditions, which is something shamefully that I didn't know enough about, but I have been learning so much more ever since. And it's really just a peek into our neighbor, which in school and growing up, you probably learn more about Europe than you ever do about Mexico. And I think that we live in a world now where that needs to be reversed, where we need to learn more, much more about our neighbors and the cultural benefits and the business benefits that they bring to our societies for a mutually benefiting relationship, that we can continue exploring as, each other's number one trade partners. And I cannot say enough things about how well the Logistics World Summit and Expo was organized, was managed. Just an incredible event. And I thank you all for listening to me talk about this. And hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I know it's a little bit different than what I typically do, but I really just wanted to just shine a light and spread more awareness about this event and about Mexico as a country. I didn't do it full justice, but I did have some pictures over on my Instagram. If you want to check it out, it's at Blythe Brum. And like I said, especially for the audience that is watching the video version, we're going to be putting some images and some video up, overlaying it, but then also, check out the channel, check out YouTube, because we are uploading, a couple different tours, especially, some of the different tours that we took around, learning about obsidian, where it comes from, jade, where it comes from, tequila, agave, all of those different things that just make Mexico, that just the unique experience from a variety of different angles. So thank you again for listening into this conversation, and hope to be able to do more of these types of stories. And we'll have more coming from this trip. But just wanted to give you a quick an overview of my experience there at this event, in case this is something that wasn't on your radar, but it absolutely should be on your radar for in the future. So thank you again. Blythe Milligan here, and check out everythingislogistics.com and all of our podcast and YouTube social channels in order to hear more and see more of content like this. So thank you again. If you've heard companies mentioned on Everything is Logistics, chances are Cargo Rex is where buyers go next to keep researching. That is the point. Cargo Rex gives logistics companies a place to be discovered, understood, and shortlisted long after an episode ends. Set up your company profile at cargorex.io and make it easier for buyers to find you.